Have you ever been playing Elden Ring and found yourself 5, 10, maybe even 20 attempts deep into trying to conquer Radon when you start asking yourself, could I eat his horse? No, no, just me. What about maybe like Placidusax? Romina? Even just Rykard? Okay, don't like the looks I'm getting. Alright, listen, I might have gotten a little curious and maybe spent the better part of 2 different evenings finding all of this out, so for the sake of my own confidence, I'm just gonna assume someone else is in the same boat and just too afraid to admit it out loud. So here's how you would cook and eat every single boss in Elden Ring. Kind of. So thing is, not all of them are actually on this list, and there's 2 main reasons for that. The first, and shockingly larger category here, is the group of bosses that are just a little too human for a video like this. See, the way we're going to do this is by looking at a boss, equating it to an organism from our own real world, and seeing how people have cooked or continue to cook that over the course of history. As you can imagine, that methodology starts getting a little awkward when the boss in question is just a normal tax-paying adult man. I'm like 99% sure I'm not allowed to give out recipes like that on YouTube, and even if I was, I don't really want to know that, much less spend multiple hours of my life researching it. So humanoids are a no-go. Most of these are pretty obvious, but I figure I'll go ahead and mention some that sort of skirt the line between human and scary monster and just end up a little too close to human for my comfort. Bosses like the Omen twins, the grafted scions, the revenants, and patches. Romina isn't here because she's 90% centipede and I'm calling the other 10% plant. We're cooking her like a plant because she's a plant and a bug, and I wanted to talk about eating centipede today. The second and much smaller category of those who shall not be eaten are the ones who are just quite literally not eaten. Important distinction here is that these bosses aren't here because they're inedible, they're just not really prepared. I'm not telling you how to safely consume anything on this list because, let's be frank, if we're looking at an ulcerated tree spirit and thinking of dinner plans, that ship is so far gone it's tickling land masses we didn't even know existed. What I'm telling you is specifically how people have cooked these things. Falling star beasts appear to be very obsidian-like, and there just isn't a lot of literature on tasty recipes for the whole family using anything above a 2 on the Mohs scale. For that reason, falling star beasts will not be mentioned again in this video. Something like an Erd tree avatar is a different story entirely, and we'll get there, but I'm gonna say it right now, don't eat tree bark. It's not impossible, it just doesn't seem like a good idea. There are a handful of bosses in this category that are entities that are made out of some sort of magical material that didn't have any obvious real-world counterpart. Now, I was fairly certain people probably hadn't spent much time conducting culinary research on anything that could be related to a substance referred to only as putrescence, but for the sake of the intellectual credibility afforded to me by my esteemed position as a niche YouTube personality, I had to just make sure. Turns out, putrescence is more or less just liquefied rotten dead people, so no, Betty Crocker doesn't really fuck with it like that. I do give it 2 months tops before it ends up on a crumble cookie, and this whole section becomes outdated though. There were a couple more substances that were a little harder to pin down, but I think I can confidently say that they don't really have a place in this video. The first and easier of the 2 was glintstone. We see just about everyone who comes into heavy contact with the stuff for extended periods of time start to fuse with it, and there's even a dragon who ate a bunch of it that now enjoys having the stuff grow in and out of its body. The closest thing I could equate that to in our real world was just radioactive material. You aren't going to start growing radium out of your skull or anything, but radioactive exposure can cause rapid cell growth, so it was kind of the closest thing. The second substance was whatever you call the stuff the silver tears and mimic tears are made out of. They obviously give the appearance of mercury at a glance, and I think that this is the most accurate comparison here. The silver tears are described as making a mockery of life, reborn again and again into imitation, and the larval tears that the player can use to respec or undergo rebirth in lore look to be of a similar substance. Mercury itself has had a bit of a history of being associated with immortality, so I think the shoe fits here. Being that they're made out of what equates to mercury and radium, bosses like the Mimic Tear and the Crystallians probably don't belong in a video about people cooking and eating them. Oh my god, people have cooked and eaten them. First Emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang, sought out the elixir of immortality so that he could dodge humanity's great equalizer and continue his rule evermore. Alchemical physicians in his circle offered him multiple brews consisting of many substances a human should definitely not ingest, including mercury. This likely contributed to his death, but even in death, he believed in mercury because he had his tomb covered in the stuff. A century after his death, a historian by the name of Sima Qian described a bunch of fun details about the tomb, including the presence of a mercury river. We don't know how true this is, given that this river would have been constructed over 2,000 years ago, but modern probes have detected quantities of mercury in the tomb so absurdly high that it remains closed as a safety measure, so it doesn't seem too outlandish. The secrets of his brew may have died with him, but luckily the Shishing Emperor Shu Hoshang would also partake in the eternal life juice that so clearly worked out for the last guy who tried it and died over 1,000 years prior. The Shishing Emperor died on January 23rd, 1567 at the age of 59. If you too would like to try making one of these immortality brews out of our little silvery copycat friend, all you gotta do is mix mercury, sulfur, and arsenates into your favorite beverage of choice. It absolutely contributed to the death of the last few dudes who tried it, but that didn't stop them, so why should it stop you? Please let it stop you. Don't drink mercury. I cannot afford a lawsuit. Did you ever find yourself drinking, bathing, or cooking and wishing your water was considerably more radioactive? Then the early 1900s might just be what you're looking for. For reasons I cannot fathom, corporations decided that radium was loaded with health benefits, and by the early 1930s, it was everywhere. Toothpastes, soaps, creams, and even in your food. They had radium energy drinks that amateur golfer and professional Nepo baby Eben Byers just swore by. Eben Byers died in 1932 after contracting jawbone cancer from drinking 1,400 bottles of radium-laced water. If that sounds fun, all you gotta do is break down a crystalline, fashion the pieces into any sort of storage container, and store your water in it. Alternatively, you can grind them into a salt and boil that into water. Yes, people legitimately did that with radium. Please don't boil radium into your water. Okay, weird technicalities out of the way, we can get into bosses that are significantly more edible. Right? Well, no, not exactly. So, remember those Erdtree avatars I mentioned before? Turns out, tree bark is in fact a thing people have eaten. Sorta. So, for the most part, tree bark is made out of cellulose, which is not a thing humans can digest. However, there is a thin layer of inner bark with a different chemical structure and as such is digestible. During times of famine, people have dried the bark, ground it, and added it to flour in order to make bread. Now listen. In doing research for this video, if I've come to learn one thing, it's that humans will figure out how to eat just about anything until it kills them. Bark bread, as it's called, is not lethal, and yet is still avoided outside of the most desperate times. It does not taste good, it does not digest without hours of stomach pains, it probably shouldn't be eaten. But if a few hours of stomach cramps are all that stand between me and giving an ulcerated tree spirit a taste of its own medicine, sign me up. We do have one more substance to go over that exists in the weird limbo between cookable and actually edible, but this one's much, much simpler. It's just bone. People have been using bones to cook for ages. You probably shouldn't really eat them, they can splinter and tear your stomach apart, but heating them in water is a good way to extract both nutrients and flavor from them. What you ultimately get out of that, however, is very dependent on what the bones were attached to. You go cooking the putrescent night, and you're probably getting arrested for the smell you've now subjected everyone living near you to for the next month. But if you wanted to cook it, that's probably how you would. You can put the bones in cold water and bring them to a boil while skimming the impurities that rise to the surface. This process is called blanching, and after you drain the water, you can add the bones to whatever broth you want to infuse with their flavor. I'm not going to tell you that a ghost flame dragon or a deathrite bird are going to give you a particularly pleasant taste, but they sure are technically able to be cooked. I think you might also be able to hit a tibia mariner with this, but their corporeality is dubious at best, so your mileage may vary. Also, because glintstone and bones are both able to be cooked, everyone give a warm welcome to our newest menu item, Estelle! I hate you, Estelle. Aww. Hey, hi, I know I said there was only one more weird cookable material in the last section, but I forgot people have cooked rocks. This isn't even in my notes anywhere, I literally just remembered this existed as I am writing this. So, from what I can tell, sodio is a Chinese street food that involves stir-frying small pebbles with various seasonings and vegetables. You then put the pebble in your mouth, suck on it, and spit it out. The dish is said to date back hundreds of years to when boatmen traveling the Yangtze River in the Hubei province would run out of food and they'd turn to the very pebbles in the river. I cannot stress enough the magnitude of the shakeup this information brings to this list. If we can cook and prepare stone, that means a whole lot of bosses are suddenly added to the menu. Every golem, all of the gargoyles, kind of the dragonkin soldiers, but they're also dubiously human, so Erdtree Burial Watchdogs, Estelle and the Crystallians again. Even the Falling Star beasts that I explicitly said would never come up in this video again are now ready to be served. At least, I caught that little tidbit of misinformation early. Now the comments won't have anyone correcting me. I'm kidding. I like learning new things from the comments. It's nice. You know, little YouTuber humor. Yeah. Does anyone want to cook a horse? Like I said, we can't talk about any of the people-shaped bosses in this game, but we can eat their mounts. The Knights Cavalry, Tree Sentinels of the Draconic and non-Draconic variety, Haligtree Loretta specifically because her horse is actually solid, and Radon all have horses who are ethically cookable enough to be discussed on YouTube. Gaius rides a boar, we'll get to him next. So horses have actually been eaten for quite some time, and there's a number of ways it can be prepared. Cecina means cured meat in Spanish, and horse is a meat that gets used for this more commonly in Spain than in Mexico from what I could find. Horse jerky, or charqui, is eaten in Chile. Meanwhile, in Germany, the meat is often made into a marinated roast known as Sauerbraten. I found a few sources saying the dish traditionally used horse meat, but I also found some that said it didn't originally use horse. Horse is commonly used in restaurants in the Midwestern section of Germany, though. Finally, the Belgian city of Lokeren has a dish called Lokersche Paardenworst, which is horse sausage in some kind of tomato sauce flavored with herbs and vegetables. As for Gaius's boar, it's honestly a little less interesting. Boar is pork. Pork is the second most consumed meat on the planet behind poultry. Every meat dish you can think of has probably had pork used in it, and in fact all of the dishes I just listed for horse meat also use pork and do so more commonly than horse. I do have a couple fun facts about cooking boars though. Testicles are eaten in many parts of the world, and while it's often bull testicles, boar is frequently used as a substitute. Also in the neighborhood of fun facts about boar testicles, if you don't castrate a boar before puberty, when you cook it, there's about a 1 in 5 chance that the meat will smell like urine and taste like feces. This smell and taste is called boar taint. So that's fun. Anyway, now we can start talking about the bosses that are just straight up actually cooked. I'm gonna go ahead and do these in order, starting from the stuff I imagine is more well-known and working my way up from there, starting with our pal, the Ancestor Spirit. The Ancestor Spirit is a deer. Deer meat, or venison, is fairly common and much like boar is substituted into dishes in the place of other meats. It's typically flavored similarly to beef, but the meat itself is quite a bit leaner. I'm honestly not quite sure how much meat is even on this boss, but its horns are glowing, and while that's probably due to magic, I'm gonna say it's glowing moss so that I can spice this section up by teaching you how to cook moss. Since this is stuck on the antlers, you're gonna wanna wash them thoroughly, then boil them in water. After the first boil, the moss should detach itself from the antlers, after which you can change the water and boil the moss itself again separately. Once that's done, you can deep fry it and flavor it with your favorite oils or seasonings and use it to garnish the deer meat. Or whatever amount of meat we may manage to get from the Ancestor Spirit. Luckily, a lacking amount of meat won't be an issue for our next boss because we're about to cook up Praetor Rykard. Now, I know his entire thing is eating people, so this might get dangerously close to, but it isn't. He's a snake, and we are just cooking snake. Typically with snake, you want to remove the head and wash the snake thoroughly, then remove the skin and insides and wash the snake again. You then cut the meat into segments to cook, and you can prepare it in pretty much any way that works well for fish since snakes and fish have similar bone size. Unfortunately, I couldn't find much info on what to do if the snake you're cooking is the size of a hotel, so we're just gonna have to wing it. I imagine the main thing that's going to differ here is the meat cutting and prepping. Due to the much larger bones, it'll probably be significantly easier to get larger cuts of meat that don't have bone in them. So we could make a Rykard steak if we wanted to. Probably even the size of a mattress or a 4-door sedan. Just make sure you bring enough people to eat it all. And while they're there, make them help with the prep work. It's gonna take a village. If you want a more standard cooking experience, then you can just go ahead and cook up the abductor virgins beneath Volcano Manor. I know, they're definitely 90% iron, which is 100% not edible, but the snakes inside are full of meat. The metal body even doubles as a cooking pot. How convenient. Jumping down to something much, much smaller, let's go ahead and serve up the Spirit Collar Snail. Hey, it has a boss health bar, it counts. I don't make the rules, I just make the rules. Snails actually have a pretty interesting amount of prep work due to the fact that their diets are toxic to humans. What this ultimately means is that in order to safely eat a snail, you have to make sure its digestive tract is clear. This can be done by feeding the snail something safe for human consumption, such as carrots or grape leaves for a few days, so it pushes all of the toxic stuff through the digestive system. Because snails are so small though, you can't remove any parts of them, which means you need to not feed them for a few more days, so they get all of the carrot out of their digestive system too, since at the end of the day, it's still gonna turn into snail poop. Once this is all finally done, there are more than a few ways to go about the next part, but I'm just gonna list what seemed easiest. Put the snails in cold water for 30 minutes so that they retract into their shells and enter a deep sleep, then put them in boiling water for about 15 minutes. Fish them out, use tweezers to remove them from their shells, and now they're ready to cook. There's a number of ways to serve them. French escargot is very well known for the unique experience offered by placing them back in the shells and eating them out of it. In Crete, snail is boiled in white wine with herbs and vegetables, then covered in flour and deep fried to make a dish called buburistus, while in Indonesia, they serve sate kakul, grilled snail on a skewer. Alright, so since we're kinda deep into this at this point, I figure I'll address the elephant in the room: dragons. Not including X-Sykes because he's rotten, or Ancient Dragon Man because he's legally able to operate a motor vehicle, there are 11 named dragon bosses in Elden Ring, and save for the number of limbs, they're probably all similar enough to cook. The awkward part then comes in trying to relate them to anything in the real world. This may come as a shock, it was for me given how little I actually go outside and see the creatures of this world, but dragons aren't real. So I had to take the next closest thing: alligators. Gator meat is often seen most in the southern United States, which makes sense because, swamps. Alligator has multiple cuts consisting of both red and white meat, but tailed tenderloin is often considered the best. Much like the rest of the meats we've already gone over, gator is kind of just subbed in for other meats in various dishes: gator meat tacos, alligator steak, even alligator jerky if that's your thing. The only real issue with equating this to something like placidusax is that there's a solid half a ton of meat we're kinda just ignoring here. This, once again, may come as a shock, but alligators don't have wings? Dragon wings aren't really the same make as bird wings, given that there's meat across the full wingspan, so that didn't really feel accurate either. My next thought was bats, but they're mammals, so that also doesn't feel correct. Of course, there are no living winged reptiles, so that's awkward too. Birds are the closest thing we have to dinosaurs, but again, the wings are different, so I was just sort of stumped here. Until I remembered a certain part of certain birds that looks, well, close enough to a dragon wing. The webbed toes of waterfowl, more specifically for our purposes duck, is as good as we're gonna get. Clip the nails, wash the feet under cold water, boil them for 10 minutes, then fry or marinate them in your preferred mixture of sauces and vegetables, and they're ready to go. This, might be a little harder to manage with a hunk of meat the size of a parking lot, but I'm sure we could fill the Forge of the Giants with water and toss them in there. Poor Fire Giant seems like he'd be a lot happier spending his days experiencing the delight of culinary artistry than he is currently spending his days experiencing life as the worst boss FromSoft's put out in the last 15 years. I'm just kidding, that's Estelle. Speaking of elephants in the room, we might as well get Golden Hippopotamus out of the way too. Thing with hippos, they're protected under multiple international conservation laws. So instead of talking about anything we've been talking about in regard to them, I'm just gonna give you hippo fun facts with Rubot. Did you know that in the late 70s, Pablo Escobar imported 4 hippos into his private estate in Puerto Triunfo, Colombia? Because hippos are quite literally the most violent animals on this earth, they were deemed too difficult to move, and those aforementioned conservation laws meant they couldn't be killed either. Those 4 have now multiplied to what estimates say could be up to over 200. They are, of course, an invasive species, and the problem is still being assessed to this day. As recently as October 2021, a US federal magistrate judge ruled that these hippos are categorized as interested persons for the purposes of deposing 2 Ohio wildlife experts. Basically, the Colombian government proposed either killing or sterilizing the hippos, and the hippos filed a lawsuit in response. Or rather, some people did on behalf of the hippos. In order to request a deposition from US courts in order to help their case, the hippos needed to be recognized as interested persons under US law. So now they are. Though this wasn't the first time America found itself knee-deep in hippo law. In 1910, Louisiana Representative Robert F. Broussard proposed House Resolution 23261. What you need to understand is that by this point, bison were nearly extinct due to overhunting, and America needed a new source of red meat. Why do you need to understand that? I don't know, because it's not going to help this make sense. Broussard proposed importing and releasing hippos into the Louisiana bayous. What's even crazier than that idea is the sheer amount of support it got. Former President Theodore Roosevelt, 1 year out of his final term, might I add, backed the idea. An article from the New York Times called hippo meat Lake Cow Bacon, which, can I just say, horrible branding, makes no sense and doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. I don't really see a lot in common between a hippo and a cow, and I'm the person who glued duck feet to an alligator and called it a dragon. If none of that was enough, Broussard even got a researcher from the US Department of Agriculture to tell Congress that the bill could add 1 million tons of meat per year to the country's meat supply. Now, a quick search tells me that a full-grown hippo weighs about 4 tons, which means they would have to kill 250,000 hippos a year for this to work. Colombia is having problems with 200. You mean to tell me that these guys expected the Louisiana bayous to safely house upwards of 300,000 to 500,000 of these things? I'm sorry? Weirdly enough, this bill never passed. Couldn't imagine why. Anyway, this has been Hippo Fun Facts with Rubot. Tune in next time for the power scaling segment. Spoiler alert, hippos beat Sukuna. Up next, we have one of our last set of mammals on the list, the bears. Rune bear, Rugalia, and Ralva. Because of the harsh climates of the region, people who lived in places like Siberia and northern Japan have historically eaten bears simply because they're an animal that commonly survived there. Pelmeni, or pelmenia, is a dish of Russian origin that consists of meat wrapped in unleavened dough to make a dumpling. Like most of the meat dishes we've discussed, it often uses multiple different meats, and bear is one of them. Another group of people that often use bear in their dishes were the Ainu people. The Ainu are the people native to northern Japan, and in the past they got their food through hunting and gathering. As such, a lot of their dishes use a wide variety of meats and fauna because they used everything that was available to them. One of the more well-known dishes is chitapap. From what I found, the translation is a bit complicated. A common one is that which has been pounded, but if we take it apart literally, the chit translates to people, which can also include the speaker or listener, so it can also be we. The tata translates to chop, bash, or mince, and the p at the end just signifies that it's a noun. So literally, it can mean thing that people chop, bash, or mince, or thing that we chop, bash, or mince. The dish itself is exactly what it sounds like, minced meat seasoned with a selection of vegetables and herbs. Because the meat is tenderized, it actually is a really good dish to use leaner and tougher meats with, and one such meat that was also used alongside bear is our final category of mammal, wolf. Wolves are carnivores and are basically all muscle, so you really either want to mince or marinate the meat to make it easier to chew. Pretty much any recipe that calls for marinated meat can have wolf subbed into it. So that also takes care of Red Wolf of Radagon and Malekith. Sorry, bud. Which, if I'm not mistaken, should only leave us with a handful of bosses left. They all fall into one of two categories, plants or bugs, or in Romina's case, kind of both by the fake rules I made up to avoid potentially talking about something unsavory. We'll go ahead and start with the plants. Miranda blooms seem to take a lot of inspiration from multiple flowers, including lilies, sundews, and potentially even hibiscus. All of these flowers are edible, and like most leafy plants, can be brewed into a tea for one option. If you wanted to more specifically cook them, lilies have a wide variety of culinary applications. The blooms can be used as a garnish, while the bulbs and roots can be added to soups, stews, and sauces, or even chopped up and stir-fried. Meanwhile, the shoots and leaves can be used as substitutes for garnishes like basil or chives. Just be careful, though. A lot of flowers look like lilies, but are actually turbo poisonous. So maybe don't source your own lilies, or just don't do anything I tell you in this video without expert supervision, or maybe just at all, actually. Don't eat mercury, please. Our last remaining flower is the Scadu tree avatar, and wouldn't you know it, sunflowers have a lot of cooking potential. Nearly the whole thing is edible for starters. The seeds themselves are a tasty snack, especially when roasted, but also have oil that can be extracted and used for cooking. The entire head is often eaten, grilled, or roasted with seasonings added. Apparently it's a lot like eating corn off the cob. The top of the stem can be peeled and cooked, and the leaves themselves can be used to wrap various meats or cheeses in. All in all, one sunflower can get you pretty far in the kitchen. Or, of course, if none of that suits your fancy, you can just smash people with it like a big hammer. That brings us, finally, to our last menu item, bugs. This includes the one random kindred of rot with a health bar, the bottom 90% of Romina, and the cemetery shade. I know it looks like a person, but it's just a dead guy being piloted by a bug, and that bug is ethically cookable. I'm just gonna specifically talk about centipedes here. Kindred and Romina obviously both fit this, and the shade bug can be cooked similarly, it's fine. In order to cook a centipede, you place them in boiling water to loosen the exoskeleton, then let it cool. Carefully remove both the exoskeleton and the venom gland, then wash thoroughly. Once you're done, remove the head and pincers, cook, season, and enjoy. Centipede can be oven roasted, grilled, or even stir-fried and are eaten in both China and Thailand. They are extremely poisonous if prepped incorrectly, so again, don't try this at home please, or at the very least, don't say you did it because of me. Once again though, this method is definitely intended for a creature that isn't the size of a bus, so we might have some issues there. Obviously, we can just use the forge as our pot again. Fire Giant's worked his way through the thrifted 2003 Martha Stewart recipe book I got him and is eager to try something with flavor, but that only solves one issue. We still gotta figure out how to roast, grill, or stir fry this thing. But don't worry, I do have a plan. So, we need a big oven. Kinda hard to just procure one of those out of thin air, which is why I recommend we just use the Erd tree. Light that sucker up, pop our giant centipede in the chamber inside it, wait maybe a couple months or decades for it to finish burning, and bam! A feast for all the lands between to enjoy. Because that's what this is all about, right? Food isn't nearly as good on its own. Like most things in life, it's so much better when shared with the ones you love. So this holiday season, if I get this video out before the holidays, present those most important to you with something they'll never forget. Bring them an oven-roasted centipede plant woman prepared by a 70-foot-tall Muppet who just wants friends.